Welcome back to 535. I'm Mariana Sotomayor, congressional correspondent at Puck News. We all know that President Trump is currently in China. He's trying to negotiate, make some deals, potentially on trade, as he's already talked about, with President Xi Jinping. But there are many lawmakers here who are trying to put restrictions on China. One of them is joining me now, most notably Congressman John Moolenaar, Republican from Michigan, who is, of course, the chairman of the Select Committee on China. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Mariana.
So I want to talk to you about one of these bills. The current one that you and Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, also Michigander,
Yes.
Democrat,
Yes.
bipartisan bill, we really like that on this show,
Yeah.
is putting more restrictions, I should say, on Chinese EVs. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, the reality is that Chinese EVs are rolling data collection devices, and we've seen this where more information is collected. China is a surveillance state, so they monitor all this, they hack into our infrastructure, and they're a national security risk. That also, in addition to some of the unfair trade practices we've seen in the area of manufacturing, where it puts our workers at a disadvantage because of their subsidies along their supply chain and making it lower cost. Sometimes they use slave labor. Sometimes they partner with the Chinese military for dual use capabilities. So there are multiple reasons why we want to make sure that Chinese vehicles are not accessing information about the United States.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can't really buy Chinese-made vehicles, but there are even American brands, and I believe European brands, who do buy parts from China. So that's
Yes.
where this concern also lies. Away from the EVs, it's more about the parts that are still coming in here that could pose a national security risk.
I think we should be concerned about batteries, we should be concerned about various technologies, and we've seen that their unfair trade practices have really hollowed out American industries. You know, you think about drones that are used for all sorts of things in agriculture and law enforcement. I mean, 80% of the drones were being made by DJI, a drone manufacturer in China, that also has a capability of sharing that information, phoning home, if you will. And we just need to be aware of very different values that China has in terms of human dignity, human rights, the freedoms, and make sure we aren't allowing them to leverage that against the United States.
So an interesting development over the past year, China and Canada have partnered up. I believe Canada is now going to sell a number of Chinese EVs. I mean, you live in Michigan, right on the border with Canada.
Right.
What's to say that, you know, a Canadian that just wants to take a weekend trip over to Michigan doesn't cross over with their EVs? I mean, does that also pose a national security threat to us?
I think anytime you have connected vehicles and technology with computer technology, you have to remember that China is hacking our infrastructure all the time. And, you know, it puts our civilian infrastructure at risk. It also puts, you know, military capabilities at risk. And so anytime you have them, whether it's routers, whether it's, you know, EVs with access to the internet, drones, even cranes, we've found that they've used cranes in our ports where they'll attach a cellular modem that can monitor what's going in and out of the port and can share that information back with the Chinese Communist Party. So we need to be very careful on this, very strategic, and recognize we're dealing with an adversary who's very capable technologically, militarily, and has very different values of human dignity.
You've introduced this bill quite recently. Is it a coincidence? Should we read into the fact that, you know, this has been introduced while the president is in China talking about trade?
Well, it really builds on, you know, the Trump administration's efforts in this area, as well as the Biden administration's efforts. There's a recognition, you know, China is advancing technologically, and then, you know, it's a surveillance society. So they're aware of everything that's going on with their citizenry, and we have certain freedoms and protections in the United States we want to keep. And so that's really the reason why we introduced this legislation. But we also wanted to make a clear case that we want to see fair trade with China, and what they've done over the years is hollowed out industries through unfair trade practices, and we need to be strategic about that. In Europe right now, they're losing their automotive industry because of these Chinese vehicles being dumped through overcapacity. It also has military implications because so much of our military industrial base depends on capabilities in manufacturing that also support the auto industry. So if the auto industry is gone, it also reduces our military industrial base.
So one thing we like to ask is obviously, can a bill like this become law? Like, are you talking with the White House, keeping them informed, not just on this, you're obviously on the Select Committee on China, there's a number of issues and a number of bills have been proposed. Is that something that you think you could get done this Congress?
Well, you know, in Congress, as you know, there's the Senate and there's the House. You know, the Senate, and you know, I want to compliment Senator Marino, who first called me about this legislation and has introduced this along with Senator Slotkin in the Senate. Representative Dingell and I have introduced this in the House. You know, we're going to work with the White House, get as much technical feedback to improve the bill so that it's workable and builds on what they're already working on in this arena. And it could go through either as a standalone bill or part of an overall package of legislation that goes through.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you as well, since you know the president is right now in China. I know earlier this year at the Detroit Economic Club, he did say about Chinese car makers, quote, if they want to come in and build a plant and hire you and hire your friends and your neighbors, that's great. I love that. Do you agree with that? He's going in there, he's talked about even yesterday, you know, he wants to open trade talks with China. There's obviously been a lot of things that have changed in the past year on that front. Yeah. But I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, and I think, you know, the Commerce Secretary Letnick has been very clear about that not happening, and so I think as the president's comments were further clarified, there is going to be a debate on, you know, if Chinese companies, you know, invest to a certain degree in American companies, what level would that be allowed? You don't want to give up control, you want to make sure we're protecting trade secrets, but that'll be a debate that's ongoing and has been for many years.
Yeah, do you think that there could be a moment of opportunity that could allow these Chinese EVs to come in? Or I mean, you're monitoring that closely,
well,
I assume.
I'm hoping that we can lock this down legislatively and make sure we save the auto industry, protect it, not from fair competition, but unfair competition that has national security implications.
Yeah. In the same realm of talking about EVs, obviously a lot of people are talking about oil and gas prices. I've even heard, whether it's from friends or even up here on the Hill, people saying, man, those people who have EVs now, they might get a little lucky as these gas prices are going up higher and higher. I'm curious, what are you telling your constituents? Maybe you heard that kind of feedback back home. What should I be doing? What's your advice?
Yeah, well, my advice is we know that gas prices will come down. We're in the midst of a conflict with a country that we cannot allow to become a nuclear power, that is threatening our interests and the largest state sponsor of terrorism, that's building weaponry that could reach our shores. So we're in the midst of a conflict, but ultimately this will get resolved. Gas prices will come down. That's my message, but I recognize that it is creating uncertainty and also a burden. But I think the American people realize they don't want to see a nuclear Iran. We've seen what Iran does around the world, and we want to make sure they are neutralized every way possible, and hopefully they'll have a better future if they have more freedom in Iran.
Do you think that there still should be American-made EVs here in the U.S.? So at least it's my understanding that in the past, when President Biden was in office, obviously we saw a push for more EVs, clean energy, et cetera. Republicans were very critical, saying, hey, don't impose these kind of policies or these kind of choices on people. Do you think that that should still be acceptable?
Well, I think my message has always been that customers should have choices, and they shouldn't be mandated by the federal government, and the car companies should be able to make the products that their customers want. And so what I was critical with the Biden administration is they were mandating certain technologies that could only be met, and it forced customers to pay more government subsidies, And to me, I think the market ought to decide these things, and people should have the freedom to choose whether it's an EV, a hybrid, or a traditional vehicle.
I wanted to ask you quickly too on the gas tax. That's an idea that's been floated. I believe both John Thune and Mike Johnson have kind of thrown cold water on the idea coming from the White House. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that could really help alleviate the cost
I
of
think
living?
everybody's concerned of what can we do to lower gas prices, and certainly that's an idea that can be debated, and
Sure.
Ways and Means and will be. But I think at the end of the day, we want the fundamentals. We're doing more energy development in the country, and that's going to help for multiple reasons. We want to speed up the permitting. So there are things we can do that will have some longer term benefits, and as we get through this conflict with Iran, I think these fundamentals will actually make energy much more affordable and help us be more competitive in this area.
Before I let you go, obviously you're examining so many different fronts on your committee, the Select Committee on China. What should we expect from you all, whether it's more bills, bipartisan negotiations, hearings in the next couple of weeks before? I mean, November's going to be here before we know it.
Well, one thing we have in the works is looking at these scam centers that are happening around the world and stealing billions of dollars, and how those have been supported, enabled by the Chinese Communist Party, and how that as an economy is spreading around Asia, and the corruption that is occurring, and the number of people who are being preyed upon in the United States. So we're going to highlight that, make sure our constituents are aware of those threats and how these online scams take place, but also to kind of tie a nexus to what China is doing by enabling that.
Yeah. Are you pushing, in case the majority flips, are you pushing for the Select Committee to stay in place? It seems like there's bipartisan will for that.
I think this has been one of the hallmarks of Congress and the House, where we've worked in a bipartisan way, looked to see how can we win this competition for the American people. And my hope is that we'd continue. We're able to focus very clearly on these issues, and then we're a force multiplier for other committees.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us in our inaugural week of 535.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back with more interviews.